Welcome to the fourth and final part of the Bande Dessinée series, mini-series here over the last few months. And we're going to finish strong today with Blake and Mortimer, 8 Hours in Berlin. So stay tuned. So Blake and Mortimer, 8 Hours in Berlin. So we have Blake and Mortimer, who was created in 1946 by Edgar P. Jacobs, the Belgian national who helped Hergé with Tintin and actually should have been co-credited for Tintin for his collaboration with Hergé on that title. He had his own series, Blake and Mortimer, first published in the Tintin magazine in 1946. 8 Hours in Berlin is set in 1963. Very important year in history. And make no mistake, this book knows about it. Obviously, it's not written by Edgar Jacobs, but written by José-Louis Bocquet, Jean-Luc Fromental, and Antoine Aubin. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering all of those names, but those are the writers, artists that created this book. Why did I say we're finishing strong? Because by far this is my most favorite story out of those four. Probably my most favorite Blake and Mortimer story, which might have to do something with its context, with its setting, being in Berlin in 1963. What happened in Berlin in 1963? First of all, it's 2 years after the Berlin Wall was built. I have my personal references to that time through my parents, who were 9 years old. My dad was 9 years old. My mom was 6 years old when the wall was built. And as I mentioned in the first episode when we talked about Asterix and the Great Divide, the Berlin Wall didn't come down until I was 6 years old. So you have a generation that lived in a divided Germany, in a divided Berlin, and the Berlin Wall physically dividing people that used to live together. So the Berlin Wall stood for 28 years, 1963, 22 months after the wall was built. And what else do we have in 1963? We have JFK visiting Berlin. I don't want to spoil this book, but I think for this purpose of the story, for enjoying the story, it's not a real spoiler, but you get JFK in here. You get his famous speech, the famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech from the Rathaus Schöneberg, where I visited many times. A friend of mine lives close by. I've been to those places in that book, and highly significant to me, highly significant to history. Even if you're not into Franco-Belgian comics, pick up this book. It was just published last year in 2022. Get your copy. Highly recommend it. Historically, storytelling-wise. If you want to break into Franco-Belgian comics, get your first dip into Bande Dessinée. I mean, there are many titles. You can pick up the Smurfs, Asterix, Tintin, Lucky Luke, but if you want to have great storytelling in a more realistic way than some of the other series, pick up Blake and Mortimer, 8 Hours in Berlin. But yeah, as always, we have the premise on the first page. Or actually the first page is here because we start out in multiple locations. There's a mass grave in Russia. There's an undercover agent escaping East Berlin. And you have Francis Blake and Professor Philip Mortimer in London. And how are all those stories connected? Well, you have to read it and find out for yourself how all of those come together. They come together nicely. And you even get an old arch nemesis showing up in those pages. So very enjoyable. I'll try to keep this spoiler free as much as possible. I'm not going to spoil the story. I'm just going to focus on the surroundings and explain why they are relevant. Why do I say they're historically relevant? Well, because to me, or to many people in Berlin, JFK's speech in Berlin in front of Rathaus Schöneberg, the city hall of Schöneberg, which is a district of West Berlin, is one of the most memorable speeches, one of the most historically significant speeches of the Cold War. And you get that within those pages here. So you have JFK and parts of his speech here, reading from it, and him saying,
"There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin." Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us. While the wall is the most obvious and vivid demonstration of the failures of the communist system, for all the world to see, we take no satisfaction in it, for it is, as your mayor has said, an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, separating families, dividing husbands and wives and brothers and sisters, and dividing a people who wish to be joined together. As a free man, I take pride in the words, "Ich bin ein Berliner."
Again, that's not spoiling the story. That's just setting some of the background towards the middle or the end of the story that happens around it. And you have Professor Mortimer, who starts out in Russia investigating a mass grave and an excavation site for a friend of his. And then you get Blake, who obviously is being with M15, starts first in Switzerland and then makes his way to Berlin for his own reasons and his own operation. The way this story is told is you basically jump between Blake and Mortimer until they at some point unite in the story. And you have this great storytelling of 2 pages with Blake, 2 pages with Mortimer, going back and forth. Things are happening, you're connecting the dots, and just culminating in Berlin. And the 8 hours in Berlin, obviously a reference to the 8 hours of JFK spending in Berlin in 1963. So his visit to Berlin, JFK's visit to Berlin, is half a year prior to his assassination in Dallas in November of 1963. So you have the year of 1963 with this historical relevance, his speech in Berlin, his assassination at the end of the same year, and you are only left to wonder what would have been, what could have been. Obviously, there are many takes on that political era. I don't want to go deep into it. I don't know what would have been, what could have been. Would the Cold War have panned out the way it did? Would it have lasted as long as it did? I don't want to go into that, other than saying that for me, growing up in Berlin, JFK had a special relevance. JFK was of a significant relevance to people in Berlin with his speech. Again, there's over 400,000 people showing up in West Berlin to see his speech in a city that at this point, it was only half of the city. Obviously, West Berlin had a population of 2 million. So between every 4th and 5th Berliner went to the speech. And I actually have to ask my parents again, my parents being kids at this time. My dad was 11, my mom was 8 when JFK held his speech. I have to ask him, were they at that speech? I've never asked them. I wonder. Maybe my grandparents were at that speech, but 1 out of 4 to 5 Berliners was there when JFK visited in 1963. And to me, growing up in Berlin, and that's like closing the circle of my my Bande Dessinée journey, where we started with Asterix and the Great Divide at the Wall. We went to California and Australia. Well, not quite, but close. And then coming full circle back to Berlin, I think is the right note to end on in this little mini series of mine, where I put my personal touch into Bande Dessinée, European comics, French comics that have probably within Europe the richest history out of all European countries. France and Belgium are rich, full of rich history up to this day. Those were the founders, the pioneers, with Edgar P. Jacobs creating Blake and Mortimer, with obviously Hergé creating Tintin, Grossigny and Uderzo creating Asterix, and Morris creating Lucky Luke. But yeah, that's the conclusion of my 4-part miniseries here about Bande Dessinée. Even though those titles started in the 20s, 40s, or 60s, again, some were written in the 60s, some were written in 2022. They're still relevant. Obviously, there's a bigger selection now of Bande Dessinée comics now out there. Go check them out. This would completely be out of scope for this video to go into modern Bande Dessinée comics. Maybe I'll do that in the future. I looked more into the classic titles of Tintin, Asterix, Lucky Luke, and Blake and Mortimer, just because that's where I started as a kid, and those were some of the books I grew up with. Not so much Blake and Mortimer. I came across that series later in my life. But yeah, there's more out there. If you want to look at stuff from the 60s, go check out Gaston Lagaffe, check out the Smurfs. And there's so much modern stuff that you should go and check out. But maybe more about that another day. For now, I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you all for sticking around during that 4-episode series. Let me know if you liked it, if you liked the concept. Mixing it up a little bit as the sun is coming out here. So let me know what else you would like to see. Again, Bande Dessinée mixed with my personal residencies across the world. I went from Berlin to Australia, back to Berlin, to the US. In this series, we started with Berlin, went to California, to Australia, and back to Berlin, just because I ordered those and segmented those into most cartoon-like. Again, Asterix and the Great Divide being the most cartoonish. We have Lucky Luke, that's still cartoonish, but not as much. We have Tintin, who is way more realistic. You feel like those are actual people you could meet in real life. And then you have Blake and Mortimer, who is really based in hard facts and history. A great story, a great spy story around historical events as they happened in real life. This is Torsten. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. And I'll let you know what I'm going to work on next soon. But for now, that's it. Thank you so much. Much love. Bye. And now the sun is gone again.